Keir Starmer has sent 100 spy flights over Gaza since becoming Prime Minister in July. The flights have continued despite Britain suspending some arms sales to Israel over concerns that they might be used to kill civilians. Joining me to discuss this story is my colleague, Matt Kennard.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining me today to talk about your latest investigation for Declassified, which also featured on the Al Jazeera documentary about Gaza. I know you've been monitoring these spy flights for a long time, but can you tell us how significant it is that they've continued under this Labour government?
Well, I think it's very significant because there has been some moves by the Labour government to restrict arms to Israel. They suspended 30 arms licenses to Israel, which comprised 8%. So it wasn't a lot, but it was significant change from the Conservative government. But they have done nothing to change the much more important parts of the British support for the Israeli war machine, and that's intelligence and logistics. And one of the main tenets of that is the spy flights, which have been flying over Gaza since December. And the frequency of them under the Labour government has basically been the same as under the Conservatives. In fact, in Labour's first month in office in August, there were 42, which was more than had been seen under the Conservatives. So it's hugely significant. And what's more significant is that we don't know how deeply this makes us, the British people, complicit in what is happening in Gaza, because there's very, very high levels of secrecy around what they are collecting and where it's going. Because we know, and it's been announced that this intelligence has been shared with the Israelis, but they refuse to say which Israeli ministries are seeing the intelligence and what that intelligence is. The argument has always been from December, and it's been continued under the Labour administration, which is that it's only to do with hostage rescue. But as you know, even in January, David Cameron announced we only had 2 hostages, British nationals, in Gaza.
There have been very few media outlets picking up on your investigations about the British surveillance flights going from the UK base on Cyprus to Gaza. Al Jazeera is one of the only ones to have done so in their documentary last week, and they spoke to an expert at Human Rights Watch about the possible legal implications about the use of British surveillance flights and sharing that intelligence with Israel. Let's take a look at what he said.
If you continue to know and continue to supply weapons and targeting information, if you're supplying targeting information despite knowing what the result is, and the result is a gross human rights violation, then you also get to complicity. So, the deniability that you're deeply involved in what's going on in Gaza begins to evaporate.
So you saw there that this potentially could make Britain a participant in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian armed groups. This is something that the Ministry of Defense denies, but I mean, it's hard to see how sharing intelligence of the battlefield to one belligerent in the conflict doesn't make a state a party to a conflict. Do you think this is something that British ministers are going to get nervous about if there's more media attention on this issue, Matt?
Well, I think they're already nervous about it. If you look at the stories that we've done at Declassified over the past year, there's been many, many times where the government has tried to keep secret information that should be divulged in normal times. And I think that's because they know they're vulnerable to prosecution for complicity and participation in the genocide in Gaza. I think that the language needs to change from complicity to participation, because as you say, we're now looking at maybe over 1,500 hours of footage collected over Gaza since December. The idea that that's only being shared with the Israelis for their hostage rescue operation is absurd, I think. And I think that it's obvious that complicity and that participation goes much, much deeper. And the fact that they've never had to divulge more information than they have is because the media in Britain has not pushed the government at all. It's just not an issue. No one talks about it. And as you say, no one's mentioned the declassified stories, which have caused outrage in Cyprus itself and have got into the Cypriot media. But there's a complete blackout on information in Britain.
So Cyprus is this island in the Eastern Mediterranean that when it became independent from Britain in 1960, it was on the condition that 3% of its land would remain under British sovereign control for use as military and intelligence bases. One of those bases is Akrotiri, this airfield where both logistics flights to Israel and the surveillance flights over Gaza have been going. and you've been tracking some of those movements on flight tracking websites. And this has also generated protests in Cyprus by anti-war activists there. Last month, they had a demonstration outside the base. They had another one earlier this year. And it does seem to be causing some backlash in the Cypriot parliament and political system there. Do you think, I mean, this hasn't been a focus in the UK, like you say, but do you think perhaps the pressure could start to build in Cyprus? We've seen last week the UK announced it was handing back the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, although keeping its military base on Diego Garcia. But do you think this is an aspect of kind of the British military that is vulnerable to challenge from peace movements in other countries where these bases are being put often against the will of the people that live there?
Yeah, I think 100%. It's fluid, the situation there, because part of the reason there hasn't been an uproar around RAF Akrotiri and Declassified, which is the intelligence base in the east of the island, the British intelligence base, is because they operate on a very, very low level. I've been there, and there's no British flags. Many people on there that I interviewed did not even know they were on sovereign British territory. So the way the British have got away really with retaining 3% of Cyprus, which still operates as a colony, is because no one really knows about it, and the ire is mainly reserved for the occupation in the north, the Turkish occupation since 1974. So, but that has been blown out of the water by Gaza. And that's why they're so upset with our reporting and so upset with the fact that the operations from Akrotiri are being revealed in an incomplete way, because Cypriots are outraged that their island is being used to facilitate some of the worst crimes of the period.
The UK government, of course, say that these surveillance flights are being done to help Israel rescue hostages from Gaza. This week is the anniversary of October 7th. The flights actually started in December last year, which is curious timing because that was after the largest number of hostages had been released in a deal between Israel and Hamas, which shows that actually the most successful proven way of releasing hostages is through negotiations rather than military operations. There's only been a handful that have been freed through military raids into Gaza, and in the process, hundreds of Palestinians have been killed in those operations, and even Israeli hostages themselves have been killed by the IDF. One of the British citizens who was being held hostage is believed to have been killed either directly or indirectly by the IDF in an airstrike, I think near Khan Yunis. And there's now just one remaining British national there, Emily Damari. So what do you think of this reason that the government's given for these spy flights to rescue hostages, Matt? Do you think it adds up? Or if not, what do you think is the point of the UK doing these flights?
I think my hunch is, and I don't think it's too much of a speculation to say, that they are giving hours and hours of footage to the Israelis for use in any operation they want. I doubt that the British are conditioning that intelligence, and also even if they are, there's no way they can check if the Israelis are using it for what they say they are. We know that the Israelis have a very adversarial attitude even towards our own security establishment, which was revealed recently by what it looks like Netanyahu placing a bug in the Prime Minister's toilet. So I think the other thing is I think that it's a semantic game as well, because as you say, the whole operation in Gaza has always been cloaked in the language of hostage rescue. That's what they say it's about. So you could say, if you wanted to stretch it as far as you can, you could say all operations in Gaza are to do with hostage rescue, because that's the top line of the operation. I also think that, as you say, it's not the best way to get the hostages home. So if you were actually going to construct a policy that was aimed to get the hostage home, you'd be pushing Netanyahu diplomatically to get a deal. where you can bring them home, which is how most of them have gone home.
Thank you, Matt. Your full investigation, Keir Starmer's 100 spy flights over Gaza in support of Israel, is available to read in full on our website, declassifieduk.org. If you're watching this video and you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please click the subscribe button below and you can make a donation through the Super Thanks button. Thanks for watching.